Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. Today I'm going to put together the right side of the engine on the Farmall 856, which consists mostly of the fuel system. Then after that we can get the exhaust manifold put on, and I have the frame rails and front bolster ready to put on too. Of course, I have a fresh batch of parts painted and hanging up. Here's the injection pump and parts of the fuel filter and the pilot valve down there for the steering. Here are the injection lines, and the return line is over here. Power steering lines that go from the pilot valve up to the front. Here's the transmission filter cover. Here's the front bolster with the power steering piston in it. And the two frame rails here. Oh, and injectors. Can't forget about those. I'll paint it up. First thing to do is to put on the injection pump, and step one of that is to get the engine timed to #1 piston top dead center, and so I'm taking off the cover plate for the timing pointer here on the bell housing. And of course center is nowhere to be found. We're going to have to turn the engine. Before I turn the engine, I'm going to pull these covers off that I put over the injector holes. It's these plastic covers. And I'm going to pull them all off except for #1. I'll just loosen #1 up a bit here. And I'll know when I have #1 coming up on compression stroke because I can hear air escaping through the cover I left on #1. Sure enough, it's on compression stroke. And keep turning until the timing marks come up. We're about at 20 degrees there. You gotta keep going. I think that's advance on dead center. See that T right there? That's top dead center. I jiggled it around some and got it to 6 degrees before top dead center. Each of these marks is 2 degrees. I don't know if you could see them on the camera, but I'm at 6 degrees before T. First thing to put in is the base and the drive shaft for the pump. It seals to the timing gear housings with an O-ring here. And this drive shaft on the end is keyed, so it can only go into the gear one way. Here you can see the drive gear from the front of the engine, so we just got to turn things to align. I'm going to bump this together with a rubber mallet. Little blue thread locker. This was a nylock nut, but it's been used, so probably doesn't nylock as well as it did on the first use. Here's the injection pump. It's a Rosamaster, and I need to remove the plate over the timing window. This little mark you see here is on the advanced side of the injector pump, and if I put a screwdriver into the tang where the shaft goes in when we mount it, I can rotate the other side and bring pump rotation in line with the advanced mark. Wow, it was way out. There's the mark. Line those two up. The reason that I timed this to 6 degrees before top dead center is because that's the static timing spec. And I noted the timing when I took the pump off, and it was at 4 degrees before top dead center at the marks lining up on the pump. But I have another problem that I'm scratching my head over. This timing gear that drives the injection pump rotates once every 2 revolutions of the engine, which is a 4-cycle system, right? You're getting fuel popped each cylinder once every 2 revolutions of the engine. This shaft can only go into the timing gear that's up front of it one way because there's a key on the shaft. You can't mess up the alignment of that as long as the gear is in time with the rest of the drivetrain, which I'm positive it is because the tractor ran. But anyway, there's a dimple on one side of this drive tang. This goes inside the pump and drives the pump, and this dimple on the drive shaft is supposed to line up with the dimple that's down inside the pump where the tang seats in. Can you see it in there? However, the dimple in the pump is 180 degrees out from the dimple on the tang. They're in the right orientation, as far as the pump sliding on and being, you know, in the right rotation here, but they're 180 degrees out. So I started backtracking. Slid a long screwdriver down in the injector hole here to make sure that the piston was at its top. And it is, you know, compared to number 2 here where the screwdriver slides all the way down. And while I was in this general vicinity, I noticed this. I don't think I was on top dead center compression. I think it was coming back up to top dead center on exhaust stroke, and it blew the cap before it would blow the tape out here. It was more secure. So we're going to try this again and bring it around 360 degrees. Now I'm pretty sure we're in the right spot, approximately. This can be our meter. Fine tune the advance with a crowbar on the ring gear. 6 degrees. And now the dot on the tang is on the side that it should be to match the pump. With everything lined up, I can put the pump on. That would have been kind of an embarrassing mistake to make. There we go. Always make sure the marks are aligned when you get it. You can rotate the pump a little bit this way or that to do fine alignment of the marks. Timing window cover goes back on. These Rosamaster pumps are a mechanical marvel. What you have here, it's so elegant the way they put it together. So there's a charge pump right here. It's a vane pump that brings the fuel in and charges it to a comparatively low pressure than what it gets on the injectors, less than 100 psi. It circulates through the fuel through the pump and lubricates the pump, as well as providing fuel to the injection ports, which are here. I have them taped up. And we'll put the injectors and the injector lines on next. But integrated in it is an advance. This is a hydraulic advance, which is based on the operating pressure that's coming out of this pump, which is based on the RPMs that the engine's turning. The pressure goes up, pushes on the hydraulic advance. You saw the indicator from that in the window. It was one side. You've got a governor integrated into the pump back here, which is a series of weights that just fly out, just like an old gasoline governor. And the diesel fuel is brought to injector pressure by squeezing on it as the rotor goes around. It kind of squeezes each charge and sends it through each port. As the shaft goes around, it uncovers an orifice that shoots to each. I redid the one on the 656 years ago. I was amazed how much they do with how few parts there is in them. At the front of the timing cover, this cover for the injection pump drive goes on. It's got a thrust bearing, a spring-loaded thrust block on it, because this shaft can float backwards and forwards a little bit with a gasket. And I wanted to note that the bolts on this are locking bolts. See that little dimple in there? It had plastic in it at one time. It's gone now. You might be able to see it better on this one. That little spot of green there is still the locking material in the bolt. I'm not sure why they were so concerned about putting locks on these particular bolts. It's not someplace I would normally think of it being that important. Since the original ones were lockers, I'll put a little thread lock on the bolts when they go back in. Injectors are next. This is just a protective end, and that's the nozzle of the injector. I'm going to lube up the bore a little bit for the O-ring to seat properly. This is a copper gasket or crush washer that goes down in the bottom. And I got to get that lined up, although there seems to be no possible way for the light to show what I'm doing. There's the washer down in the bottom. Injector. I got to get this to seat, the O-ring. There we go. That top O-ring is just a dust seal, and that's new as well. Compression is held by the copper crush gasket down the bottom. These get torqued to 10 foot-pounds or 120 inch-pounds, which is not much. It's surprising. I took these injectors to D&W Diesel in Auburn, New York, and they checked them out, which means they checked the pop pressure on them and made sure they weren't dribbling or anything like that. These operated around 2300 PSI, and I guess an injector's simple. There's all different types, but basically they overcome spring pressure in the injector to release fuel when fuel builds up to that set pop pressure, and then you get a little burst of fuel into the cylinder at the correct time. Injectors are in, supply lines are next. These are the banjo bolts that attach the supply lines to the pump, and what I did is, in order to paint them, I taped the portion of the bolt where the banjo fitting goes. Firing order is the same old 6-cylinder 153624. This is the number 1. How do I know number 1 goes here? Well, that's the only way that the number 1 line will fit. I didn't keep track of which line went where, but they'll only fit in one spot each line because of the way they're bent. And I have a photo that showed me where number 1 hooked in. I took this number 1 line off because I forgot. I like to spray them, make sure they're clean. I'm going to go in firing order, so the next is number 5 in the sequence. And from the back side, this pump rotates counterclockwise, so we're working around this way. These are banjo fittings at the injection pump. There's a hole in there, and fluid can circulate through the annular space. It comes up through the bolt, through the hollow end in the bolt from the pump, goes out the holes in the side of the bolt into the annular space, and then through the line. The seal is made by Teflon washers on either side. This line is for number 3 injector. This is just a cap that the diesel shop put on. One of the challenges of these Rosemaster pumps is getting the back injection lines on the rotary head. That's why I waited to install the frame rails, because it makes this job easier with them off. This is my hobby. It's meant to be meditative work in the winter, relaxing work. I try not to rush. That's the point of meditation, right? Number 6. These Teflon washers for the injection pump came with my gasket kit, my lower end gasket kit. The 656 has softer steel washers to seal, and I've always had problems with them. I tried softer steel and harder steel. I should try the Teflon because these didn't leak. They had Teflon seals on it and they didn't leak at all. I always have had problems with the pump lines leaking on the 656. This is the last line, number 4. Now there's a return line that comes from each injector back to the pump, so these are more temporary plugs I put in. This is where those return lines hook in. It's just a single line that snakes under here. It's kind of in the way of everything. That's why I waited until I put the main injector supply lines on before putting this on. It's hard, makes it harder to turn the bolts. Now I'm trying to figure out how to play Jenga and get this back in. Maybe it'll go in from this end. Probably not. I think if I temporarily disconnect this coolant hose, I'll be on the road to Happy Town. This is the order in which I took it apart, so I'm sure it goes together this way somehow. The way this seals, it's low pressure because there's a rubber bushing down in there and the tube slips into the rubber bushing and then the nut clamps down on the whole thing to compress the bushing to the pipe. I'll show you. Well, the rubber bushing is down in there. If I push down on that, I'm going to have to loosen up the other ones. It'll slide in there. That return line from the injectors comes back down through here and into the pump. Well, actually it Y's and goes back with the return to the fuel tank. That's it for the fuel lines. It's kind of cool how they wind around and organize themselves. There's two clamps. One goes here and one goes here to, I think, keep the lines from vibrating so much with these. They look like fuel line actually inside of them. I'm going to get some new fuel line, put them on before I reinstall them. Next thing is kind of a big job. I want to put the frame rails and the front bolster on. Obviously I've got some support here for the front of the engine that needs to be taken off and reconfigured, and I got to get the steering lines in before I put the frame rails on. This is the steering pilot valve, and it's the brains of the steering system. It gets its hydraulic fluid from the MCV down here. I explained how it worked in the disassembly video. And these are the power steering lines that go up to the front bolster from the pilot valve. They kind of fit around the bell housing and behind the frame rail. I think I'll just tie them up here until I get everything else assembled. I'm going to use the hoist to supply some extra support for this side because I'm going to take this tie off the jacks in front. Remember, I got a 10-ton screw jack underneath the bell housing, which is really taking most of the weight, I think. Now there's 4 bolts that have to come off where the frame rail attaches, and these also hold the engine to the bell housing. Spacer washer to hold it away from the new paint a little bit. She likes about a 32nd. Now I loosened up the back bolts on the frame rail so it would spread a little bit. Ah. Oil this up a little bit. Maybe the paint will not stick. Ha! That definitely changes the look of the tractor. I'll put the steering on underneath. This is a lot easier than taking them off and putting them on. Well, you've got the front axle support under here. Ask me how I know. Now I can hook up these long steering lines that run up front. In front, these have banjo fittings just like the injection pump with O-rings on either side. And I think I want to clean up that paint a little bit so the O-ring's sitting on bare steel. Huh. Must have had a little oil under the surface. I'll touch that up with a brush afterwards. Clean it and touch it up. I guess cleaning isn't always perfect, like anything else. These are awfully long lines from the front steering all the way back to the pilot valve. There's a couple supports along the way, or clips. They're in my parts pile and I'll install them later. The exhaust manifold. I coated this with high heat spray can paint. I have okay luck with it. Use a bunch of different brands. Before I torque down the exhaust manifold, the fuel filters actually mount to it. This plate mounts to the exhaust manifold, and the filters are the same for two. The primary filter and the final filter both mount to this, so I got to put it back together after painting it. And then between the two is a line, so primary outgoing goes into the line, goes into the secondary, and then comes out to the injection pump here. You have to color coordinate the nuts, you know. Red ones on a red plate, black ones at a black manifold. Ugh, I was so proud of myself for planning out that whole thing with the color of the nuts, and it turns out these nuts go on before the fuel filter plate. Oh well. Torque spec on these manifold nuts is 55 foot-pounds. I got an extension I can barely get on some of the nuts, but we'll get her close. Short socket works better. Usually I just use the Guten-Tight spec for this, but I guess this will work. Now the fuel filter. And the fuel line that goes from the filter to the pump. Might as well put on the fuel filters. Napa 3339 is primary. Napa 3340, the next number, is final. Might as well put in the transmission filter too. I cleaned up the cover. Inside the filter housing you can see how oil flows. This is the pickup tube that angles down into the rear of the transmission and sucks oil into the filter. Here's the hitch pump that's for remote hydraulics and 3-point hitch. So it's sucking fluid through into here to go through that pump. And then over here, there's a hole that goes through the casting and on up to the MCV pump. And behind the filter plate, there is a square-shaped O-ring that gets replaced with the filter. It goes right on this plate. And into there. Here's the filter. And then onto the filter goes this bypass. So this is a spring. And of course, oil's being sucked in through here. It's coming in from the outside and going into the center and getting sucked through. If you have a clogged filter, it'll suck through the screen. That is, unless the screen gets clogged. And I've had that situation with ice with the 504 when it used to have problems with getting water in the high tram. Filter cover, gasket on the inside. I use sealer on the filter cover side of the gasket, but not the body side. And it helps keep it from leaking, I guess, some. I haven't had a problem with these leaking, so that's the way I do it. It makes it easier to change the filter. Finally, I guess these things. The book calls this the steering and gear selector support assembly. It's more like Grand Central. Everything runs through here. Hydraulics and wiring, and the gauges are here, and the steering and the shifting mechanisms. It's very crowded. Oh, that goes there. Of course, there's a piece that goes on top of this up quite a bit further. I think I'm going to have to take this side off to get the gear selector shaft in when I get that all set, so I'm just going to temporarily snug it here. I think I make good progress. The tractor's getting bigger. That's batch number 2 of parts. What am I going to focus on next? I think I'm going to focus on this support here because, like I said, there's so many parts that run through it, and I still have to fix the linkages that are loose in it. So I got to drag all that stuff out and start looking at how I can repair those. That'll probably be most of a batch, along with the front, the stuff that goes on the bolster, the big cast radiator surround or grill surround. I'm going to wait on the front running gear, the front axle and tires and the rear tires until later because they make the tractor a whole lot bigger in the shop and they're just impediment to getting around the tractor. So those will wait. It's coming along. I don't think I'm going to finish it this winter, but it's okay. Just work slow at a nice pace and enjoy the process. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.